When I tell people I'm a band director, I usually get one of two responses. Either they smile and say, "Oh, I love band in high school," or the other one, they raise an eyebrow like I just said I teach finger painting. And honestly, I kind of get it because the system I work in here in the United States is, or the system that most of us grew up, doesn't treat music, art, or really anything that isn't on a standardized test as an essential anymore. Every year, I watch funding shift, attention drift, and respect disappear. And I've seen kids pull out of rehearsals for test prep. I had my job described to my face as extra. And I've seen being told to stop rehearsing so the sound won't distract the students taking the state exam. It's exhausting, but it's not just me. The story isn't unique. It's happening across the country. Whether you teach music, history, third grade reading, or chemistry, if you're not directly improving a school's state test scores, chances are you've been sidelined. So today we're going to start with a simple question, but one that cuts deep. How did we get here? How did public education in America go from being a profession built on trust, expertise, and relationships to a checklist driven machine built around data points and bubble sheets? How do we go from schools that were supposed to shape citizens and thinkers to institutions that produce silence, compliance, and burned out students and teachers? This didn't start overnight, and it sure as hell didn't start with just one law or one politician, but it did start with something very specific: fear. A manufactured crisis, a media fueled panic that said, American kids are falling behind. And politicians, instead of investing in solutions, declare war on teachers, on schools, on the very idea that learning could be complex or messy or joyful. And to understand where we are, we have to rewind the tape. Let's go back to 1983. In 1983, the Reagan administration released a report that would change the game. A Nation at Risk. That's the title. Sounds very dramatic, right? And that was the point. It claimed that American public schools were so bad, they pose a threat to national security. One of the most quoted lines from the report reads, and I quote, if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. An act of war. That's how they frame public education. And in a lot of ways, that report kicked off the era we're still stuck in, the school reform era. But here's the thing they don't tell you. The data used in A Nation at Risk was misinterpreted, sometimes deliberately. Studies later showed that students' performance wasn't in free fall. In fact, by many measures, students' achievement was improving. But the message was already out there. The damage was done. The public started to believe that schools and teachers were the problem, that we weren't doing enough, that we needed accountability fast. So what did we get? Well, we got test after test, benchmark exams, state assessments, federal scorecards. Then came the famous No Child Left Behind in 2001. And that's when everything changed. No Child Left Behind made testing mandatory. If schools didn't improve their scores year after year, they were punished. Funding was cut. Staff were fired. Schools were labeled as failures. And the pressure trickled all the way down to the classroom. Certainly, it didn't matter how you taught. It only mattered what you taught and whether it would show up on the test. Forget critical thinking. Forget creativity. Forget engagement. If it wasn't going to help a kid fill in the right bubble, it wasn't valuable. And that's where we lost something essential. We stopped treating teachers as professionals. We started treating them like proctors, like babysitters with scripts. You're not supposed to deviate from the pacing guide. You're not supposed to teach outside the test. You're supposed to deliver the material, grade the worksheet, and move on. And if your kids don't perform, it's your fault. Your job, your pay, your worth. But here's why this matters. Beyond the classroom. Because when we defund schools, when we devalue teachers, when we reduce education to a test score, we don't just hurt the students, the kids. We are hurting also democracy. Let me say that again. We hurt democracy. We built a political system in a media environment that rewards outrage, ignorance, and manipulation. If we create a generation of future voters who've been trained to memorize, not to question, to follow, not to lead, is it really any surprise we end up with a man like Donald Trump in the White House? A man who can't read a full page, who brags about not listening to briefings, who lies without blinking, and who got elected in a country that spent 40 years gutting its public education? Trump is not an accident. He's the symptom. He's the result of a system that stopped teaching civics, stopped valuing literacy, stopped fostering curiosity, and started rewarding compliance. When education is weak, authoritarianism thrives. When kids aren't taught how to spot propaganda, how to fact check, how to think, they become easy targets, easy votes. We got conspiracy theories, we get anti-science rhetoric, we get people who believe books are more dangerous than assault rifles. We don't just need better test scores, we need better citizens. So that's why we're doing this series, because I believe education is not just an issue, it's the issue. We can't fix the economy without education. We can't fight climate change without education. We can't preserve democracy without education. If we want a better country, we need better schools, period. And that means we need to start telling the truth about how we got here, about who benefits from broken schools and who suffers the most, and about how we can take it back. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about what we lost when we stopped trusting teachers and what we need to do to rebuild an education system that doesn't create the next Trump, but the people who can stop him. So let's rewind the tape. Let's go back to 1983, because that's where the test we didn't sign up for, the test of whether public education will survive. And that's where it really began.
The modern school reform movement began 40 years ago with the release of the landmark report, A Nation at Risk. This urgent call to action described a crisis in American education and made recommendations to improve student achievement. In the decades since, federal, state, and local leaders have pursued countless reforms aimed at boosting outcomes. But what actually worked? And what lessons can guide education policy today? The Hoover Education Success Initiative brought together 12 exceptional scholars to analyze the reform record of the last 40 years in our own report, which was called A Nation at Risk Plus 40. The goal was to document attempted changes in areas like standards, assessment, governance, and more, and then analyze the available evidence on each reform's impact. Taken together, the series gives an unprecedented view of reform efforts over time, revealing both bright spots and blind spots. The sheer volume of reforms pursued is striking. Billions of dollars were invested to adjust parts small and large across a mostly unchanged system. About half focused their improving efforts on inputs, like teacher quality or learning materials. These had limited effect unless implemented deeply and over time. Process reforms like accountability policies were harder to assess, but they showed promise when sustained and coherent. Output reforms directly targeting metrics like test scores did boost student learning initially, graduation rates rose, and achievement gaps narrowed, but many gains have reversed in recent years.
Let's go back to 1983. Ronald Reagan is in office. The Cold War is still humming in the background. Not the crisis it was in the 60s, but still tense enough to shape everything from movies to military budgets. Japan is overtaking the United States in auto production. American factories are closing, and there's a growing anxiety across the country that we're falling behind. Not just economically, but morally, culturally, intellectually. The Reagan administration wants answers. And when politicians want answers, but don't want to admit the role of corporate outsourcing, union busting, tax cuts for the wealthy, or deregulation, they look for an easier scapegoat. And this time, they blame the schools. So we enter the nation at risk. This was a report published by the National Commission on Excellence in Education, a body handpicked by Reagan's education secretary, Terrell Bell, who was one of the few moderate voices in the Reagan administration when it came to education. But let's be clear, this report was no neutral academy study. It was a political document. It was a careful crafted narrative meant to stir outrage, build conscience around reform, and justify intervention. And boy, did it succeed. The headline that everyone remembers is this: if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America to mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. So let that sink in. Not an act of negligence, not a crisis in need of investment or community support, but war. A war against American mediocrity, supposedly led by teachers, classrooms, public schools. So what did the report actually say? It framed American schools as failing catastrophically. But if you actually dig into the details, something interesting happens. Because it turns out the data didn't actually support the panic. Let's talk SAT scores, since they were heavily cited. Between the mid-1960s and early 80s, SAT scores had dropped, yes. But by 1983, they had already begun to stabilize and improve, especially among Black and Hispanic students. And those declines in the 70s, scholars later tied them not to failing schools, but to a widening test-taking population. More students from low-income backgrounds were taking the SAT for the first time. More participation equals more variations in scores. That's just basic statistics. If they would have gone to school, they would have known that. But nuance doesn't win elections. So instead of acknowledging that, the commission cherry-picked numbers that paint a crisis. And it worked. So here's what people don't know. In 1990, the United States Department of Energy, yes, energy, did a follow-up study titled Sandia Report that debunked much of a nation at risk. They found that when you disaggregate the data, most student groups were actually improving, not declining. But the Sandia report was buried. It was never officially published by the Department of Education. Why? Because by then, the crisis had already become political currency. Both Democrats and Republicans were using education reforms as a way to sound tough and forward-thinking without having to invest serious money or tackle real structural problems like poverty, racism, or inequality. And let's be honest here. If we had framed this correctly in 1983, the report would have been called A Nation at Risk. It would have been called A Nation in Denial. Because the real crisis wasn't lazy teachers or failing schools. It was a nation that refused to deal with inequality. A nation that let Wall Street write policy. And we still do. In a nation that abandoned its working class and then blamed public education for the consequences. And once A Nation at Risk hit, every governor and senator wanted to get tough on schools, accountability, They became the buzzword. But instead of investing in support, training, or community engagement, they invested in testing. By the late 80s, states were pushing standardized tests in high school graduation exams and curriculum benchmarks. The idea was, if we can measure it, we can fix it. But anyone who's ever taught, like really actually been in the classroom, knows that they know that not everything worth learning fits neatly into a multiple choice test. What got squeezed out first? The arts, PE, recess, civics, critical thinking. And of course, music, band, choir, all the stuff that makes school feel human. These weren't just extras. They were, and still are, the only reason some kids show up every day. But because they couldn't be standardized, they were labeled non-essential. They got defunded, deprioritized, dismissed. And let me just say this. I've seen firsthand what happens when you treat music as optional. You lose more than melodies. You lose kids. You lose confidence. You lose joy. And when you reduce teachers to proctors, you don't just lose instruction time. You lose morale, professionalism, eventually people. That's not a hypothetical. Look at the teacher shortages we're seeing today. They didn't come out of nowhere. They came from decades of devaluing the profession. So let's fast forward a bit. Today, nearly 40 years later, 50 years later, we're still living in the shadow of a nation at risk. It's crazy. According to the Brookings Institution, most of the assumptions in the report were either incorrect or misleading. Yet its legacy remains baked into modern education policy. Consider this. Between 1980 and today, the real dollar investment in public education has stagnated in many states, while the cost of compliance and testing has exploded. Arts programs have been cut in over 80% of low-income school districts, according to the NEA. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, the average United States public school teacher earns 19% less than similarly educated peers at other professions. Meanwhile, high-stakes testing companies like Pearson and McGraw-Hill raked in billions. Pearson alone earned over $4.5 billion in U.S. education contracts between 2012 and 2019. This isn't an accident. It's a political choice. So what's the real risk here? The real risk wasn't that our kids were dumb. The real risk was that our leaders were dishonest. Leaders were dishonest, guys. And they ignore roots like poverty, segregation, underfunded schools, trauma, and systemic racism, and replace them with scantrons and scoreboards. And in doing so, they create a machine that doesn't serve students or teachers. It serves politicians, corporations, and PR firms. So A Nation at Risk told us that America was falling behind because of its schools. But maybe America's schools were falling behind because of America itself, because of inequality, because of political cowardice, because of an unwillingness to invest in the things that truly build a society: education, culture, art, compassion. So if we're going to move forward, if we're serious about building a better country, we got to stop blaming the classroom for every problem we refuse to fix. We got to stop pretending that we can test our way out of injustice. And we got to start telling the truth, even if it's 40 years overdue.
It's time to come together to get it done so that we can truthfully say in America, no child will be left behind, not one single child.
The president's nearly $48 billion education plan includes testing children annually to more closely monitor reading and math skills, rewarding schools where grades improve and punishing failing schools by cutting federal money to districts that don't show progress, and allowing parents of children in public schools that fail 3 years in a row to use tax dollars, government vouchers, to move their children to private schools. But this last part, vouchers, makes Democrats wary. In fact, Mr. Bush didn't even mention it by name.
When schools do not teach and will not change, parents and students must have other meaningful options.
Democrats say spending federal money on private schools undermines public schools. Even so, some key Democrats say they're eager to work with the new president.
There are some areas of difference, but the overwhelming areas of agreement and support are very, very powerful.
And other Democrats, including Senator Joe Lieberman, offered their own education plan minus vouchers.
I feel strongly that we cannot afford to wait any longer to craft a serious national response to what is clearly a serious national problem.
Wolf Blitzer, CNN, Washington.
The education they deserve.
So we've rewound the tape back to 1983, to A Nation at Risk, the Cold War era report that turned public schools into scapegoats and sold the public on the idea that test scores were the destiny. But we're not stopping there, because if A Nation at Risk planted the seed, the next 2 decades, the 90s and early 2000s, is when we watched the seed grow into a full-blown testing industrial complex. This is the era of accountability. But let's be clear, accountability didn't mean honest reflection or thoughtful improvement. It meant standardized testing, high stakes, high pressure, high profit. So let me break this down. Let's start with 1990s, the Clinton years. So Bill Clinton, yes, a Democrat, helped carry the torch of education reform. In 1994, his administration introduced a law called Goals 2000, Educate America Act. Now, on paper, Goals 2000 was about setting national standards and helping all students reach high academic achievement by the year 2000. And listen, that sounds great. Who doesn't want kids to succeed? But what it did, it quietly and bureaucratically was lay the groundwork for mandatory state standards and statewide testing system. It shifted the focus from local community-based education to federally defined benchmarks. And more importantly, it normalized the idea that test results, not well-rounded education, not teacher input, not student well-being, should be the metric for success. And once that idea took hold, it became very hard to shake. So here's a quick fact check. Before Goals 2000, only 14 states had official statewide testing programs. By the end of the 90s, over 45 states had them. Testing had moved from a tool to a requirement, and it was about to become a law. Now, let's fast forward to 2001. George W. Bush is president, and just months after 9/11, he signs into law one of the most consequential education policies in modern history, the No Child Left Behind, NCLB. This was the moment that the testing of sessions went clear. No Child Left Behind requires states to test every student in reading and math every single year from grades 3 through 8. And once in high school, schools were required to break those scores down by subgroup, race, language status, disability, or poverty, and show adequate yearly progress, or AYP. That sounds like equity, right? Wrong, because it wasn't about supporting struggling schools or lifting up underserved students. It was about punishing any school that didn't meet impossible goals. So let's talk about the impossible goal for a second. Then the No Child Left Behind demanded 100% proficiency in reading and math by 2014. Not some improvement, not realistic progress. It was 100% or else. If schools didn't hit AYP, they got labeled as failing. If they failed for multiple years, they were subject to loss of funding, mandatory restructuring, state takeovers, conversion to charter schools, and staff firings. Imagine trying to run a school under that kind of pressure. Imagine teaching kids who are dealing with poverty, trauma, food insecurity, language barriers, and being told either all of them pass the test or you lose your job. That wasn't reform. That was sabotage. So what happened to subjects like art, music, and science? They got pushed to the sidelines because No Child Left Behind only tested reading and math. So that's what schools focus on. PE, gone. Choir, reduce. Social studies, crunch it to a single unit. Civics, oh, you mean that thing we used to teach before we started producing voters who can name the 3 branches of government? And science was tested only once in elementary, middle, and high school. So even as climate change and public health became existential threats, science instructions wither because it wasn't on the damn test. So, it wasn't about learning. It was about compliance. So let's sit with that, because that is the single most accurate summary of what No Child Left Behind became. This wasn't about education. It was about control. It was about obedience to a system of metrics, rankings, and threats. A system where teachers were judged not on their expertise or relationships, but on whether 9-year-olds could pass a test written by a for-profit company. And if you want to know how those companies did, well, let's follow the money. In the wake of the No Child Left Behind, a new industry exploded. Standardized test publishers, prep companies, tutoring firms, data trackers, scoring centers, professional development programs. Let's talk about Pearson, the largest testing company in the world. Between 2000 and 2015, Pearson signed state contracts worth over $1 billion. Billion. Now, states like Texas, Florida, New York, and California spend hundreds of millions each year to develop, score, and analyze tests, all outsourced. These companies had no stake in your students. They weren't in your classrooms. They didn't know your communities. But they wrote the exams, they set the cut scores, and they made the money. And what was the impact on the teachers here? Well, burnout, surveillance, shame. Districts began evaluating teachers based on student test scores, a method called value-added modeling, or VAM. It was junk science. A 2010 study by the National Education Policy Center found that VAM to be inconsistent, unreliable, and incapable of separating teacher effects from other factors. But it didn't matter. Politicians were addicted to data-driven decision-making. So teachers got pink slips for factors completely outside of their control, like poverty, trauma, attendance, test anxiety. The profession became hostile, and the pipeline started to dry up. And here's where it connects back to today. Because when you look at our current education crisis, the teacher shortage, the culture war, the test obsession, the narrowing curriculum, it all traces back to this testing takeover. We handed our schools to corporations. We handed our curriculum to politicians. We handed our kids' futures to a spreadsheet. And then we act surprised when schools are crumbling? So, No Child Left Behind wasn't just a law. It was a philosophy. It said, learning is only real if you can measure it. It said, if kids fail, it's the school's fault. It also said, punish first, support later, or just never. And we're still living with that philosophy today. Even after No Child Left Behind was replaced by Every Student Succeeds Act in 2015, the culture of testing never left. Because it's profitable, it's convenient, and it lets politicians point fingers at schools instead of fixing the root cause of inequality. If a nation at risk was the spark, then No Child Left Behind was the fire that swept through every classroom in America. They were burning joy, creativity, and curiosity along the way. And unless we change the system, unless we stop mistaking data for education, we're going to keep raising students who know how to take tests, but not how to think.
Those videos and monkey mascots would have you think that testing is amazing, which is why this spate of recent news stories has been so surprising.
In the lower Hudson Valley, many districts reported that more than 25% of their students opted out.
More than 1,700 elementary, middle, and high school students opted out of taking the PARCC test.
There was 5 kids that I was with.
They took the test?
Yeah.
Like almost the entire auditorium was filled with kids that didn't take it.
Not a single junior showed up to take the Common Core Smarter Balance test this week.
Wow. The entire class boycotted the test. The only other thing an entire class of juniors has ever managed to agree on is that the scarlet letter could be told much simpler with emojis. Yeah, we get it. We get it. Red lady, finger, finger, devil, baby. We've all read the book. It's a good story. But look, is it any wonder that American students are sick of tests? Between benchmarks, diagnostics, pre and mock tests, they take a lot of them.
Students are taking between 10 and 20 standardized tests depending on the grade, a total average of 113 different ones by graduation.
113 is a lot of tests. It's approaching the amount that you'd ask your doctor for the morning after you woke up from a one-night stand with Colin Farrell. Just give me all of them twice. And this amount of testing can take a toll.
Teachers have reported kids throwing up, kids crying, especially the younger ones. And it's the pressure.
That's true. In fact, this happens so much that official instructions for test administrators specify what to do if a student vomits on his or her test booklet. And something is wrong with our system when we just assume a certain number of kids will vomit. Tests are supposed to be assessments of skills, not a rap battle on 8 Mile Road.
Let me start this segment with a simple question. When you picture a student, a real living, breathing student, what do you see? Do you see their name, their passion, their quirks? Do you know what music they like? What makes them laugh? What they're scared of? Or do you see a number? Because that's what we've been trained to see. Like, students, especially those in the underfunded, over-policed schools, have been reduced to data points. And teachers, we're no longer mentors, creators, or facilitators. We become evaluators, managers, paper pushers. Forced to measure, sort, and rank kids like products on a factory line. We used to ask, what do they need to grow? Now we ask, what's the score? Now let's talk about how that happened and how it hurts most, or who it hurts most. If you teach in public education, you know exactly when it happens. The test prep season. It doesn't show up on the calendar, but it takes over everything. Field trips get canceled, art projects stop, class novels go back on the shelf, and the pacing guide, it becomes the Bible. Don't fall behind, don't teach off script, don't waste time, because the test is coming. And everything depends on it. But here's the thing, test prep is not learning. Test prep is rehearsal for one performance in one moment with stakes that are way too high. We strip the kids of joy, of discovery, of failure. Yes, failure, which is where the deepest learning actually happens. Like when you fail, you actually learn. In test prep culture, mistakes are liabilities. Creativity is a distraction, and the only thing that matters is that damn bubble sheet. So what happens to the kids who don't fit that mold? Well, let's talk about ELL students, English language learners. Under No Child Left Behind and even its replacement, the Every Student Succeeds Act, ELL students are expected to take the same reading and writing test in English, often after being in the country for less than a year, even a week. That's not accountability, that's just cruelty. And what about the students with disabilities? Special education students are often placed on modified plans, individualized education programs, or IEPs. But the system still forces many of them to test on grade level standards that don't align with their cognitive or emotional development. The result? Anxiety, test refusal, behavioral issues, and eventually disengagement. We tell the kids who learn differently that their learning doesn't count unless it fits into a box someone else designed. And then we wonder why they stop trying. Now let's get to the part that pisses me the most. Because data isn't just being used to sort students. It's been used to punish communities. Across this country, test scores are being used to label entire schools and neighborhoods as failing. And surprise, the schools labeled as failing are mostly always in black, brown, or low-income communities. Let's get some facts on the table. In 2013, a study by the Economic Policy Institute found that family incomes is the single most powerful predictor of standardized test performance. Not teacher quality, not curriculum, poverty. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, the black-white achievement gap in reading and math has barely moved since the 1980s. That's over 40 years of quote-unquote reform with almost no meaningful impact on racial equity. And yet, the states with the most intense testing regimes, like Florida, Texas, and Mississippi, have consistently ranked among the lowest in actual student outcomes when you adjust for funding equity, or in my case, Oklahoma, 49th, woo. But instead of questioning the system, we weaponize it. Low scores become justification for school closures, charter takeovers, teacher firings, real estate redlining, funding cuts, and the expansion of private for-profit solutions that don't actually serve kids. Now, let me be a little blunt here. We've created a system where poor kids take the test. Rich kids take the test and then go back to their robotics lab or their private saxophone lessons or their AP literature class with 12 students. We're not measuring talent. We're measuring access, opportunity, trauma. And then we label those results as quote-unquote achievement. That's not data. That's manipulation. And if you ask any teacher, they'll tell you, my student just lost their dad to gun violence, but I'm supposed to get them to score 75 on this benchmark. My ELL student is brilliant in Spanish, but the test only values their English reading speed. My autistic student made huge emotional progress this year, but the test only counts their math. None of that growth is visible in the data, but it's real, it's human, it's education. And this system, it erases it. It tells teachers, if it can't be quantified, it did not happen. It tells kids, if you didn't pass, you fail. You're nothing. Even if they work harder than anyone else in the room. Here's what happens when you do this for long enough. Kids start to believe they are numbers. Teachers start to see kids as risks. Parents start to panic. And schools stop being places of growth and become places of pressure. We used to ask, what do they need to do to grow? Now we ask, what's the score? That line, that shift is the heart of everything that's gone wrong in American education. So who's benefiting from this system? Spoilers, it's not the students or the teachers. It's ed-tech companies that sell benchmark software, consultants who offer test-prep boot camps, charter networks that cherry-pick students and use inflated scores as PR, and politicians who use data to justify cutting budgets or selling schools to private firms. This is not education. This is exploitation. It's a machine built on fear. Fear of failure, fear of data, fear of falling behind. And instead of dismantling that machine, we've handed the keys to the schoolhouse. And we didn't used to run schools this way. We didn't used to treat kids like algorithms. Yes, we had problems. Yes, there were inequalities or inequities. But the goal was human development, not data compliance. Today we have smart kids who are terrified of failing. We have creative teachers who are afraid to color outside the lines. We have communities who've been told by numbers on a spreadsheet that they don't deserve good schools. And we have a public that's been convinced that this is normal. But it's not. It's a policy failure, it's a moral failure, and it's a betrayal of what education is supposed to be. If we want to rebuild trust in schools, if we want to raise a generation that can think, empathize, and lead, We have to stop reduce the students as scores. We have to start seeing them again as learners, as dreamers, as the whole human being. Because education isn't about compliance. It's about becoming.
Good evening to you. When your child goes back to school next week, a new law impacting each and every public school student will be in effect. That new law replaces one of the most significant and controversial education measures in recent decades, the No Child Left Behind Act. It was signed here in the Tri-State in 2002, and at the time it wasn't controversial at all. It was actually universally praised and admired. Local 12's Jeff Hirsch tells us what happened between then and now and what happens next.
Hamilton High School, January 8th, 2002. A special visitor for a special occasion.
Thank you for such a warm welcome. It's great to be in the home of the Big Blue.
President George W. Bush came to Hamilton to sign the No Child Left Behind Act because Hamilton is in the district of then House Education Chair John Boehner. There was also another powerful political leader on hand, as noted by a reporter. Check out the glasses.
One major theme today, bipartisanship. A Republican president, a very Republican-friendly crowd, gave a warm round of applause to Democratic liberal Senator Ted Kennedy, who was very involved in getting this bill passed.
No Child Left Behind promised more federal money, fewer federal strings, and tougher academic standards with annual high-stakes tests in reading and math.
I understand taking tests aren't fun. Too bad. We need to know in America. We need to know whether or not children have got the basic education.
That was the intent. The reality was different.
The unintended consequences is all the mandated testing at all the different grade levels and all the different subjects every year just became so overwhelming that parents have pushed back and just said it's too much. And teachers feel like it's really narrowed the curriculum.
The testing mania. Teachers and principals could in theory lose their jobs under No Child Left Behind if test scores lagged, ultimately backfired. Too much testing, parents and teachers argued, meant less time for things like art, music, and physical education, important subjects in creating a well-rounded child. There's more to life than what critics called drill and kill tests in math and reading.
I'm hoping the pendulum is starting to swing back and people are saying every child, every year, and all these subject areas is probably a little bit, it is too much. And I think the government has heard what the parents have said.
And so after years of political wrangling in December 2015, President Obama signed a replacement for No Child Left Behind, the Every Child Succeeds Act. The new law keeps some of No Child Left Behind, like focusing on how well minorities do, and there will still be annual testing. But the new law is supposed to have more flexibility for states and schools on how to test and how to improve schools which are not doing well. Plus, there are fewer federal do this or else unfunded mandates.
We're hoping they really are serious and say our local boards of education at the local level and the local citizens truly understand what's happening locally and make the best decisions. I'm hopeful that we're moving in that direction.
Of course, that was the hope behind No Child Left Behind as well.
We want to make sure no child is left behind. Every child must learn to read.
Easy to say, not easy to do. Jeff Hirsch, Local 12 News.
The new law, Every Student Succeeds, authorizes about $25 billion in federal education spending in 2016. If that amount is actually spent, it's about $2 billion more than what was spent on No Child Left Behind in 2015. While multiple billions is sure a lot of money, most school funding comes from local taxpayers.
Let's talk about a word that's been weaponized. Accountability. And I already mentioned this, but we're going to go deeper on this. Because in theory, accountability sounds great. It sounds like fairness, responsibility, justice. Like when someone does something wrong, we want accountability of that. But in American education, accountability has come to mean punishment, threats, surveillance, blame. And this is a question. Accountability for who? Is it accountability for the lawmakers slashing education budgets? Or for the corporations selling overpriced, glitchy testing software to schools they never set a foot in? or for the billionaires funding charter school expansion while dodging taxes? No, of course not. It's accountability for schools, for teachers, or for kids, but not the kind that builds trust or community, the kind that punishes publicly and relentlessly. Let's dig into how that happened and why accountability became the mask that hides control. So, by the time No Child Left Behind took hold in 2001, the rhetoric was clear. If your school doesn't improve, their test scores will take your funding. If you don't meet adequate yearly progress, AYP, will label you a failure. If your students don't meet the state standard, we'll shut you down, replace your staff, or convert you into a charter. That's not accountability, that's a hostage situation. It wasn't just theoretical. Between 2002 and 2015, over 3,500 schools nationwide were closed or restructured under the No Child Left Behind sanctions. Most of those schools were in black and brown neighborhoods, were underfunded before the tests even show up, and never got the resource that needed to improve. Just a countdown clock to closure. So let's talk about teacher evaluations. And this is always my favorite thing to talk about, because the No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top both push states to adopt teacher evaluation systems tied to student test scores, often called value-added models, VAM. And here's the scam. VAMs try to isolate a teacher's impact on student growth by using complicated algorithms. But they're unstable, wildly inconsistent, and scientifically flawed. The VAMs are. A teacher can go from effective to ineffective based on a single year's test results, even if they taught the same exact way for both years. In 2014, the American Statistical Association warned against using VAMs, stating that, and I quote, "Most of the variation in test scores is attributable to factors outside of the teacher's control." This was an ASA statement on the VAMs in 2014, if you need to know. But that didn't stop states from adopting them. Why? Because the illusion of data-driven sounded more serious than actually investing in support systems. So teachers got evaluated and fired based on results they couldn't control. And then came merit pay. Merit pay. The idea? Pay teachers more if their students perform better on tests. That sounds great, right? Except here's what actually happened. Teachers started competing instead of collaborating. Test prep became the default curriculum. Cheating scandals exploded in places like Atlanta and Washington, D.C., where educators, under impossible pressure, altered test results just to keep their jobs. You know what merit pay didn't fix? Poverty, classroom overcrowding, language barriers, unfunded mandates, toxic stress, and burnout. Because money tied to test scores doesn't create equity, it just creates fear. So when funding depends on test scores, you're not accountable. You're under a threat. And that's it. That's the core of this entire segment. This isn't a system of support. This isn't a system that asks, how can we help you succeed? This is the system that says, if you don't hit our numbers, you are gone. If your school doesn't improve, we'll erase it from the map. If your kid struggles, we'll label your community as broken. And the word they use for all this is the stupid word, accountability. Give me a break. And let's talk about the real world examples. Because everybody was like, oh, I think you're just talking out of your ass. Well, here's some real world examples. New Orleans, post-Katrina. In the wake of the Hurricane Katrina, nearly every public school in New Orleans was converted into a charter. Over 7,000 unionized teachers were fired, the majority of them black. The justification? Test scores. But what really happened was a political and economic takeover using the word accountability as a cover for privatization. This was from the Cowan Institute from Tulane University, 2015. Then let's go to New York City, the Bloomberg/Klein era. Schools receive an A or an F letter grades based on test performances. Schools in low-income neighborhoods were routinely given D's or F's, then closed or reorganized. But the formula? Flawed. The metrics? Constantly changing. The impact? Displaced students, shutter buildings, fractured communities. And accountability never meant equity. If this system actually cared about equity, we'd be funding schools based on need, not test scores. We're reducing class size, or we be reducing class sizes, hiring counselors, and supporting multilingual students. We'd be investing in art, music, science, civics, the thing that builds whole human beings. But we didn't do any of that. We built a culture of compliance. We built a climate of fear, and we did it under the banner of accountability. And let's call it what it is: control, not accountability, not improvement. Control. Control over teachers, over principals, over districts. Control over which schools stay open and which get sold off. Control over whose stories get erased and whose profits rise. Because of the end of the day, accountability in American education has never been about building trust or creating justice. It's been about managing the perception, about punishing the poor, about disciplining labor, about shifting blame away from policymakers and onto classrooms already drowning in unmet needs. So the next time someone tells you they believe in accountability in education, ask them what they mean. Do they mean support or do they mean control? Because the difference is everything.
More than half of the nation's teachers say they will leave their profession earlier than they originally planned, and burnout is the main reason.
That's the result of a recently released poll from the National Education Association. News4Jack's digital reporter Travis Gibson looks into the issue and how it's affecting local school districts.
Teachers around the country are feeling overworked and underappreciated, especially since the start of the pandemic. The National Education Association, the nation's largest teachers union with almost 3 million educators, unveiled its latest survey. It showed that 90% of members say feeling burned out is a serious problem. 80% said unfulfilled job openings have led to more work obligations. 55% said they plan to leave education sooner than planned because of the pandemic. That's up from 37% from August of last year. The president of the Duval Teachers Union, Terry Brady, said it's not a single issue that's causing teachers to walk away.
It's a multiple issue that's triggering, I think, a lot of the resignations and early retirements. It's, yes, it's the pandemic, not feeling safe. Second of all, it turns around and there's so many absentees or vacant positions. Our current teachers that are in the classroom are voluntarily giving up their planning times to cover classes, or we don't have enough subs.
Governor Ron DeSantis has pushed to increase teacher pay in recent years and raise the starting salary to help recruit more teachers. But the Florida Teachers Union leader says increasing pay for new classroom teachers alone isn't enough to fix the issue.
We really need to see a lot more movement in giving districts and unions the ability to negotiate fair raises for everyone who works in our schools, because here's what we know. We have over 4,000 vacancies currently still existing in our schools in the state of Florida among our teachers, and we have nearly 5,000 or just over 5,000 vacancies among our support staff. And so we have to address this crisis.
The State Board of Education is set to consider a new report about teacher shortages this week, and increasing public education funding continues to be a big topic in Tallahassee during this legislative session. We will continue to keep an eye on those developments. Back to you.
Let me start with a simple but heartbreaking truth. We didn't just lose teachers. We lost the belief that teaching is a profession. That what this segment is about, the erosion of respect, the rise of burnout, and the deliberate dismantling of the idea that educators are experts, leaders, and essential to the health of our democracy. Because if the earlier segments show how data and testing hijacked our classrooms, this one's about the human cost. So let's talk about the numbers first, because these are brutal. According to, and this is as most recent as I can get at the moment, according to a 2022 National Education Association NEA survey, Over 55% of teachers said they were thinking of leaving the profession earlier than planned. Nearly 90% say burnout was a serious problem. And those numbers weren't just high in red states. They were high everywhere. Rural, urban, suburban, elementary, secondary, public, and even charter. And what's causing it? Unmanageable workloads, disrespect from parents and politicians, inadequate pay, like low pay, constant testing and documentation, being told what to teach, when to teach it, and how to teach it. Teachers aren't leaving because they can't handle the kids. They're leaving because they can't handle being treated like robots. It's a system that demands miracles but gives them crumbs. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. New York teachers today are often trained more in behavior management than in pedagogy. Now, not how to design inquiry-based lessons, not how to foster a love of reading, not how to differentiate instruction from multilingual or neurodivergent learners, but how to keep the class quiet, how to document discipline, how to fill out the right forms. It's not the fault of teacher prep programs entirely. It's a response to the increasingly hostile environment they're sending teachers into. When classrooms are under-resourced, over-tested, and deeply segregated by race and class, the job shifts from teaching to survival. And let's talk about how the public talks about teachers. This next part is personal, and I deal with this all the time. I've been told I'm just a music teacher. Those people can go fuck themselves. I've been told I should be grateful for summers off. You deal with this. I've heard people say teachers don't work full-time or that anyone can do that job. And when we try to push back, we get accused of being lazy or political or indoctrinating kids. So let's set the record straight. Teachers are working 10 to 12 hours a day, often unpaid after hours. Teachers are buying supplies with their own money. They're averaging, and this is a nice number, but this is way more. It's $500 to $1,000 a year. It's more like $2,000 a year plus. And teachers are taking on roles of counselors, parent, mentor, first responder, advocate every fucking day. And teachers are leaving in droves, with over 300,000 public school teachers and staff gone since the start of the pandemic. This isn't whining. This is a warning, guys. You cannot gut a profession of its autonomy, stripped it of respect, underpaid, and still expected to thrive. And it's not just teachers, it's the whole building. Administrators, especially in high poverty schools, have been turned into compliance managers. Their job, not to support instruction, not to build a culture, but to make sure the numbers look right. Did we meet the attendance benchmark? Did every teacher submit their test prep form? Did we complete the walkthrough? Did we collect evidence for the next evaluation cycle? Everything becomes fucking documentation. Everything becomes defensive. And it trickles down. Creativity, risk-taking, relationship building. That's all nice. But if it doesn't check a box on the district rubric, it doesn't count. So what happens? The culture of education shifts from growth to survival, from professionalism to policy enforcement, from hope to hustle. And let's talk about money for a second, because it's directly tied to how society values a profession. According to Economic Policy Institute, public school teachers in the United States make on average 19.2% less than other college-educated workers with a similar experience. And that's just base salary. Most of us don't get bonuses or stock options or performance incentives unless we tie our souls to test scores. Meanwhile, we're expected to de-escalate trauma, meet every special education accommodation, handle online platforms, adapt to legislative changes, keep kids safe during school shootings, and still smile through it. I got more. How about this? Provide food because the kid has no food at home. Maybe give a kid a ride because mom and dad forgot they existed, or they have no mom and dad. What about making sure the kid's okay, or then seeing mom would die of a drug overdose? How about that? Or that you have to drive a kid to his own mother's funeral. What other profession has to fight this hard just to be seen as one? And like, who's benefiting from this? This isn't just happening by accident. This professionalism drain benefits a very specific group of people. The corporations that sell teacher-proof curriculum and plug-and-play software. Charter networks that pay low wages and discourage unionization. Politicians who want teachers afraid to speak up about racism, history, and LGBTQ plus rights. Oh, and the right-wing media ecosystem that thrives on portraying educators as enemies of the state. If you deprofessionalize teaching, if you make it seem like anyone can do it, then you can. Then these people can slash wages, silence dissent, eliminate unions, and justify privatization of the entire system. And this is the long game, guys, and it's working. I mean, come on. Remember when the Republican Party fought really hard to get a bunch of conservative judges in the Supreme Court just so they can overturn Roe v. Wade? What do you think is happening to in our education system? And we used to treat teachers like professionals. You all seen the memes, like back in the day, kids were afraid of the teacher telling their parents that they had an F. Nowadays, the kid can do whatever the hell he wants, and the parents will say that it's our fault. It's like, again, not perfect, not above critique, but trust. We're not perfect. We have our own issues, but we need to be trusted, skilled, and essential. We used to think of teaching as a calling and a craft, but somewhere along the way, we let the cynicism replace trust. We let bureaucracy replace joy, and we let data replace dignity. Today, we're watching thousands of experienced, compassionate, brilliant teachers walk out of the classroom for good. And we're teaching a new generation come in unsure, unsupported, and already on the edge of a burnout. So what do we lose when that happens? We don't just lose educators. We lose wisdom, continuity, creativity, mentorship, and safety. We lose the heart of the school. And worst of all, we lose the belief that teaching is a profession. Not charity, not labor, not babysitting, but a profession. One worth fighting for.
Across the country this week, protesters speaking out against efforts to dismantle the Department of Education.
Down, down, down with Tabor.
One of the largest protests in Denver, where amid the federal shakeup, Colorado educators called on lawmakers to increase school funding in the face of state budget cuts.
And on the steps of the state capitol, the signs really do say it all. My third graders make better choices than our government. That certainly encapsulates the attitude of so many of the educators that converged on this site today, facing not only a budget shortfall in their own state, as lawmakers try to figure out how to make up $1.2 billion, but also the fact that thousands of miles away in Washington, President Trump could very well decide the fate of the Department of Education.
We will lose out on services. We will lose out on staff. Our buildings will be underfunded, and our kids will not get what they need.
The federal Department of Education responsible for student loans, civil rights complaints, Title I funding for low-income schools, and students with disabilities is now all facing an uncertain future. Special education teacher Stephen Fairfield worries losing the federal department would add to the penny pinching already being felt by educators statewide.
It's a two-front war, basically, for the rights of students and educators. Most importantly, the kids, though. The kids that we serve need every dollar that they can get.
Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers Union, also sounding the alarm, saying on CNN,
what are we saying to parents? What are we saying to the public? And that's part of the reason why 6 out of 10 people in America, independents, Republicans, Democrats, say don't do this.
But not all educators think there's cause for concern just yet. The superintendent of Lowell Public Schools appearing on a local radio show in Massachusetts.
A lot of it is like conjecture and like what's it going to mean, how much are we going to lose, and so on and so forth. It's not based on actual fact, much of it, because we simply don't know at this stage.
Governors largely split across party line.
Let's stop for a minute. Not to analyze another policy. Not to break down more data, but to step back and breathe. to feel, to reflect on what all of this has done. Not just to our classrooms, but to our hearts. Because after everything we talked about in this episode, the test, the compliance, the disrespect, the burnout, there's one truth I keep coming back to. We all failed that test. Not because we didn't try, not because we didn't care, but because the test wasn't designed to be passed. It was designed to measure obedience. And when we tried to resist, to question, to hold on to the human parts of education, the system punished us. And let me ask you something. When you think about the best teacher you ever had, what do you remember? Was it the worksheet they gave you? The test prep they drill into you? The data point you became? Or was it something else? Because I hear this all the time about people about their experience in high school. About who is the teacher who they remember the most. Like who you think a teacher helped you? Was it the teacher who stayed after class because they believed in you? The one who sparked your love of reading or science or art? The one who challenged you to think deeper, to see the world in a new way? That's what education is supposed to be. Human, dynamic, liberating. A place where curiosity matters more than compliance. When learning is messy, joyful, and real. Where teachers are mentors, not middle managers. Where kids are people, not spreadsheets. We've lost that. And the truth is, we didn't lose it overnight. We lost it piece by piece. And I saw it happen up close. And this is a personal note. At my last school, we had a principal who every single afternoon will not just email, but on the intercoms, announce the attendance numbers for every grade level. Every day, like clockwork. There was no context, not reflection, no explanation. Just 9th grade at 84%, 10th grade 87%, 11th grade at 81%. It was like running a casino. Like children missing school was a spreadsheet problem, not a human one. And people got tired. Not just because it was annoying, but because it was hollow. Because we knew that there were kids staying home because their parents were evicted, or because their siblings had a personal issue, or because they had to go work to help their family make rent. But none of that mattered to this person because the data didn't care, and neither, it seemed, did our leadership. And this wasn't just that announcement. Like this principal, who I won't name, but whose damage I will never forget, had a vision. And that vision didn't include dissent, didn't include humanity, and definitely didn't include the arts. She fired some of the most incredible teachers I ever worked with. Not because they weren't doing their jobs, but because they disagreed with her obsession with test scores. They pushed back, they asked questions, they advocated for their students, and she saw that as a defiance, not dedication. She gutted our arts. She gutted our rosters from music, choir, dance, all this stuff. She slashed elective schedules and replaced creativity with compliance, because to her, education was about numbers, not nuance. And I'll be honest with you, I'm glad I'm not there anymore. I got out, but not everyone did. And that school is still paying the price. And here's the other part about what she did, and that still to this day haunts me. If you ever went to college, or if you realize how hard it is to a lot of 18-year-olds entering college, taking some classes, right? Some people have failed at college. And college is not for everyone. Why is she always pushing for freshmen, 9th grade in high school, to take college classes when they cannot even, most of these kids at the moment can barely read at a 5th grade level because it all looks good on her fucking report card? Same thing. She gutted our art system to put these kids in a class that she knew will set them up for failure. And this is not just her. That was the district. And here's the thing. We were never meant to win. The system has never designed to nurture teachers. It was never designed to honor joy or curiosity or community. It was designed to control, to sort, to rank, to punish. And we bought into it because we were scared. Scared of losing funding, scared of being labeled, scared of looking like we weren't doing enough. So we gave in. We taught to the test. We stopped pushing back. We started measuring our worth in data points. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that none of this is normal. It's not normal to spend half your school year in test prep mode. It's not normal to evaluate a teacher based on child's one-day performance. It's not normal to cut music and art and call it efficiency. It's not normal to treat schools like failing businesses instead of living communities. And here's a question I want to leave you with. If you wouldn't let a test define your child, why do we let it define our schools? Why do we accept a system that punishes the vulnerable and rewards the privileged? Why do we let billion-dollar companies write the rules for classrooms they never step foot in? Why do we keep pretending that test scores tells anything more than who has access and who doesn't? Because right now, it means data, it means fear, it means silence, but it could mean something more. It could mean imagination, it could mean liberation, it could mean future worth fighting for. And that's where we go next. We're going to talk about that. We're going to the next episode. We're going to dive on to the next stage of this crisis. It's even more brutal than testing. Budget cuts. Because if the last few decades hollowed out the soul of education with testing, the last 10 years have burned the house down entirely. It's like we're going to talk about schools with no nurses, districts with 4-day weeks, arts programs eliminated, textbooks that are over a decade old, buildings that are falling apart while billionaires collect tax breaks. And we're going to ask the real question. What happens when the system built on fear gets defunded into a collapse? Like, we're going to talk about how we got here and how we get out. And you can rebuild public trust in schools if you treat teachers like enemies. You can't inspire kids if you crush the people who show up for them every day. And you sure as hell can't save democracy if you treat education like a liability instead of a promise. We all failed that test. But I want you, before I leave this episode, I want you to remember, it is not too late to change the score. Have a good one. And I hope to see you the next time. This has been The Problem With. We're going to keep going with this series.